Hey everybody, this is Perch. This next question I've got here that we'll talk about, I was kind of on the fence about answering. Nothing against a writer. I've answered aspects of this before, and I don't want to be the same old thing again. And it definitely flirts with that. But the final paragraph kind of won me over, and so I think it's worth talking about. But this is one where I challenge you, the viewers, as we get into the comments, to actually take the newness aspects of this question, take the parts that are different. Let's comment on those. We don't need to go down the same rabbit hole that seems to always occur. You're welcome to do whatever you want, but I'm just saying it'd be nice to do something a little different. So here's a mail. It says, "Hello, Perch. Hope you're having a good day." And this question doesn't change that. Okay. Do you think Marvel and DC comics nowadays are afraid to let female and LGBTQ plus characters take real hits or die in a brutal fashion like the male characters can? If they are, I think it's because they're afraid of the potential backlash they'll get from Twitter and mainstream media outlets like CBR, Polygon, and the rest. Particularly Bleeding Cool. Bleeding Cool loves to stir this stuff up of what this mail is getting to. Absolutely loves it. And do they know they're being disingenuous? Hell yes, they know they're being disingenuous. You could tell exactly, by the way, who Bleeding Cool likes and doesn't like by how they write their articles. It is almost comical how they will take anybody that they don't particularly like and write kind of the most sloppy, slanted news possible against them. They will find fault in anything. It's a scummy organization, always has been. One example. Sorry, back to the mail. One example that comes to mind is Star Wars Vader Dark Visions #3, which follows, I kid you not, an obsessive Imperial Darth Vader fangirl. This was there was a woman who really, really liked Darth Vader, was really into him, thought this is the love of my life, kind of toxic relationship type stuff. And the comic is filled with weird expressions, which is what a lot of people hooked onto. But anyway, back to the mail. She collects pieces of his suit from after battle and even has delusional fantasies about him and herself. When she professes her love to him in the meditation chamber without his helmet on, Vader expectedly kills her with his lightsaber and orders his crew to come get this garbage out of my quarters. It was an interesting moment. So that comic got a lot of reaction from people saying this is, look at the trash Marvel's putting out, kind of that crowd. But the other crowd also hated it for the reasons this mail's about to go into, which is kind of what started to win me over on why this is an interesting topic. As you can imagine, the backlash to this scene was swift and intense when the comic first came out, as Twitter mobs decried the comic as one or two media outlets spoke about it, plenty of which claimed the comic, the writer, and Darth Vader himself were sexist. Meanwhile, the rest of us just thought it was a bad comic and the backlash was overblown. I'm sure you could think of many other examples like this in comics happening in the last decade, but I think this fear is why some female and LGBTQ plus characters don't suffer real damage, life-threatening wounds, or gruesome deaths as their male counterparts because the publishers fear the backlash from the audiences they're pining for. I don't know that it's the audiences they're necessarily pining for, but it is the audiences they want to appease. I think those sound like the same thing. They're not quite. I think that in many cases, Marvel's a fascinating company, as DC, many others, but Marvel particularly here, because they do have the attitude of, we'll take money from wherever we can get it. They absolutely do have that belief, and they're absolutely kind of relentless as a company in terms of, they will say a lot of things about, wanting to help marginalized writers and everything else, but then they give them abysmally poor page rate. So a lot of people, and including the comments of these videos, get very hung up in like, well, they're just getting paid what they're worth. It's like, you're missing the story. You're actually missing the con that's going on here. The con is that you got this big company that's saying, no, we stand by this community, we stand by these writers, we're going to bring these people in, and then they give them an absolutely shit page rate to write in. Now, if they really wanted that community, if they really wanted to stand by it, wouldn't they pay them a wage that they don't have to go out and do embarrassing GoFundMes and everything? Wouldn't that make sense? But they don't do that. They pay them dirt. And the trick is they get, in many cases, they get the reaction they're hoping for. And that reaction is people going, these are terrible writers. You shouldn't pay them anything. They're bad writers. And Marvel will immediately turn around and kind of poke it and more importantly, get the writers themselves to poke it, going, hey, these bigots are trying to keep me from doing my job. Meanwhile, Marvel quietly pays them, $45 a page for an anthology, for example. That's lower than Boom. It's lower than other companies today, from what I gather. Regardless of what other companies are doing, it's a shit rate. So if you're paying, I mean, so who's taking advantage of who here? It feels a lot like Marvel kind of pokes the bear on both ends, and then goes, "Ah man, let them fight." Meanwhile, here's some change, because Marvel will turn around and go, "Yeah, we stand by our community. We don't appreciate those bigots who are fighting them. Here's your $45." Like that, that's not really support. It's a con. It's an absolute con. But anyway, this comic was funny because I think you did have the Mary Sue, you had CBR, you have others, you had talking about toxic masculinity and other things. And what's weird is the trope that was being used here was the obsessive stalker fangirl trope, and that's tried and true. Lots of movies have done it. Lots of TV shows have done it. It's the crazed woman who doesn't no self awareness, doesn't understand the situation she's in, and then she gets killed for it. And I mean, again, tale as old as time in some cases. They've done this many, many times before. But in comics, this did get that reaction. It was, toxic Darth Vader, and the writer was sexist for writing a woman in a state of, insanity and duress, and all the rest. A disgusting piece of work. Bunch of, writers, editors that, fail at, having a successful job in esports. Decry it as being, this wouldn't have happened if I was in the company. Okay, fine. But it is, it goes to what the viewer is saying here in this mail, is it takes on this moment where you don't want to have negative things happen to, in effect, if you're just counting the women, half of the, population of the comics. And unfortunately, if you're telling a story, and you can, Stephen King, very much a left wing icon now, put it very well in his book on writing. You have to be willing to put characters through ugly, dangerous things. If you don't, you're not being honest to the reader, and they sense it and they will tune out. The characters should also have wonderful things happening to them, but if you have boundaries saying, well, we have to protect the character in this way, readers sense that, and it's poison to your story. Anyway, there's one more paragraph to this. It says, this fear might have also bled into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. I noticed this too. Underwhelming film, by the way, since Scarlet Witch kills the male members of the Illuminati in very brutal ways. But the female members are killed in comparatively mundane fashion. Apologies for a long email. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's more to it than that. I hope you can at least point me in the right direction to better understand this part of the comic industry. Doctor Strange, you had, the men die in fairly horrific ways. I mean, I went to see this movie with my kids. My kids are like, holy hell, what's going on here? You had Doctor Strange in this scene. Scarlet Witch unravels Mr. Fantastic. Black Bolt's head explodes. Professor X's neck is snapped. You have these very, very brutal scenes. And then with Monica Rambeau, a rock falls on her. And in you just kind of squish. Scarlet Witch, even later in the movie, rock falls on her. Rock falling on people seems to be kind of the go-to for some of the overpowered female characters in the film. Captain Carter gets kind of hacked in half of their shield, but you don't see it. It kind of happens, somewhat off. It doesn't occur. And in this case, I'm not over here going, oh my God, what we need is lots of blood. We really need to have this brutal, bloody, violent, gruesome scene. But it was striking that it did feel kind of like you're writing. It felt like, well, if we make it, if we make the deaths of the women too gruesome, then somebody at Screen Rant or CBR or Newsarama or Bleeding Cool is going to write in about how the director is a toxic male, and that there's a long history. Did you realize Sam Raimi had a movie where women were zombies and got punched by a man? And I mean, it just turns into all this crap. And what does seem to be happening, and it's again, I think it's less agenda driven, less, there's an agenda to everything, but I mean, it's less, hey, we need to appeal to this audience, therefore we won't kill the characters in brutal ways. It is more, hey, we don't want anybody bitching at us or accusing us of doing anything, so we're just going to take the safest possible route we can, which unfortunately becomes the most vanilla, benign route that they can. And that's ultimately the problem for, I think, women and LGBTQ characters, is if you take this overly safe route and you never give them, the characters, anything to really struggle or come back from or fight against, then the characters are all bland. This winds up hurting those characters. It as a crazy, as a crazy outcome. And my wife thinks about this or talks about this on a regular basis. She has very much come to this point of view that the agenda behind a lot of this material that goes on is very anti-woman. That it takes women back from a lot of the gains that they made in terms of rights and feminism and everything else. It takes them away from it, because it basically washes out any complexity to their characters. It makes them a lot less interesting. She pointed out, she's like, the people who have the best stories at this point in movies and comics tend to be white men. And the white men tend to have the best stories because they get, they get horrible things happening to them. They get a lot of crazy complexity going on. There's a lot that goes on with the white male characters. They don't feel, nothing feels safe for the white male characters. They feel like, it feels like anything could happen. It feels like, you have to watch closely. You have to stay tuned to what's going on in their journey because they're not going to be protected. And as a result, they're far more interesting. And I think she has a point. I think this is ultimately a big negative toward women and LGBTQ characters, because it takes away the complexity that arguably grows their character, makes them interesting, makes them struggle, makes them evolve. And this is the stuff people come in and pay for. This is the stuff people tend to like. So you can't protect your characters to the point of having them be so sanitized that they don't really matter. And that does feel like what's happened. It's what the viewer is trying to hint at in the mail. And so I agree. I do think that's occurring. I think it's occurring because there's panic that if they do it wrong, then somebody's going to write an article and it comes, and then suddenly they're having to defend themselves against stupid, which is what happened with that Darth Vader story. I mean, you get Darth Vader through the course of the series brutally murdering dozens, if not hundreds, of men, robots, everything else. But it's like, oh, here's a obsessive fangirl that he kills, and it's like, oh, I can't, how sexist. Like, he's a mass murderer. He's borderline genocide, and we're worrying about this. It's somewhat bizarre. Anyway, let me know if you think otherwise. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and thanks for listening.